Emily Stevens was only 12 years old when she stepped into Maplewood Middle School, full of hope for a new chapter in her life. She had just moved to the small town with her family, and although she was shy and a bit nervous, she was determined to make friends and fit in. The first few days felt exciting. The halls were buzzing with laughter and conversation, the classrooms were filled with new lessons, and the cafeteria offered an array of food choices. Emily found herself excited for the possibilities that lay ahead, even though she was often quiet and kept to herself. But that sense of excitement quickly faded as she started to navigate her new environment. The first sign of trouble came during her third day at the school. While walking through the hallway between classes, Emily overheard a group of girls laughing and pointing at her. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but then the laughter became louder and the whispers more pointed. Emily tried to ignore it and walked a little faster, hoping to escape whatever they were saying. Unfortunately, it was only the beginning. By the end of the week, the taunts had begun. They weren't vicious at first, just a few comments about her glasses or the way she wore her hair, but the comments still stung. The bullying started small, in subtle ways that were easy for others to overlook. A nasty comment about her outfit. Here, a few whispers behind her back there. But for Emily, it felt like an overwhelming wave crashing over her. It wasn't just the verbal jabs that hurt. It was the way the other students seemed to turn their backs on her, the way she was pushed aside, as though she didn't belong. She felt invisible, but not in a good way. Every day she walked through the halls with her head down, hoping to avoid any confrontation. She felt like a stranger in a place that was supposed to feel like home. As the days went on, the bullying grew more direct. She found notes in her locker calling her names, nerd, loser, and other cruel labels. One afternoon, as Emily sat at lunch by herself, a group of boys came up to her table. They didn't sit down or speak to her. Instead, they made a show of whispering to each other and laughing, all while staring directly at her. It was as though they enjoyed watching her squirm. Emily, feeling the heat rise in her face, quietly packed up her lunch and left the cafeteria, trying not to let the tears spill out until she was safely behind closed doors. At first, she didn't know how to handle it. She tried to talk to her teachers, but when she mentioned the bullying, their responses were vague. They told her to ignore them, or they'll stop eventually. But the bullying didn't stop. It got worse. Emily began to dread each school day. The pit in her stomach grew heavier with every step she took toward the school gates. She started to change her routine to avoid the kids who picked on her. She would take longer routes to class, avoid the areas where the bullies usually gathered, and keep to herself as much as possible. She wished she could simply disappear, to be anywhere but in that school, surrounded by people who made her feel like she didn't matter. But the isolation she felt only deepened. Emily didn't tell her parents about the bullying. She didn't want to worry them. Instead, she tried to push through, hoping things would get better. Every day she put on a mask of normalcy, pretending everything was okay when inside, she was falling apart. It was hard for her to imagine a life where she wasn't the target of cruel jokes and whispers. The school, once a place full of promise, now felt like a cage. Emily's world shrank a little more each day. As the weeks passed, Emily's world seemed to shrink further. The bullying, which had started off as small, hurtful comments, now felt like a constant presence in her life. It wasn't just the cruel names anymore. It was the daily reminders of how alone she was. The whispers in the hallways followed her wherever she went, growing louder as more students joined in. At lunch, she now found herself sitting alone in the corner of the cafeteria, trying to disappear into the background. The space around her felt too big, too bright, and the laughter of other kids seemed to pierce through her like a sharp knife. Every day she kept hoping that it would stop. But the reality was that the bullying was only intensifying. The taunts came at all hours, even online. Emily had recently joined social media, hoping to connect with other kids from her school and maybe find some acceptance. But instead, it became just another avenue for her tormentors. Photos of her, taken without her consent, were posted, with rude captions mocking her appearance, her mannerisms, and her clothes. Her classmates started leaving cruel comments on her posts, some of which she couldn't even bring herself to read. At first, Emily tried to ignore it. She logged off, took a break, but each time she went back, it was worse. The words were there, glaring at her no matter how much she tried to avoid them. Every notification was another reminder that she wasn't wanted. The impact of this constant bombardment was beginning to show. Emily's grades, once solid, began to slip. She couldn't concentrate in class, her mind constantly drifting to the latest insults she had received. Even when she tried to focus on her work, the noise of the bullying followed her, echoing in her thoughts. Her once passionate love for drawing waned as the weight of the words dragged her down. What used to be a safe escape now felt pointless. What was the point of creating art when it felt like no one cared, or worse, when she was nothing more than a joke to those around her? At home, her parents noticed the change. Emily, who used to be so talkative and open, had become quiet, withdrawn. She no longer spent time with her younger brother, Ben, or even showed much interest in the things she used to enjoy. But every time her parents asked what was wrong, Emily simply told them everything was fine. She couldn't bring herself to tell them what was happening. She didn't want them to worry. She also feared that they wouldn't understand or might make things worse by intervening. Besides, what could they do? The bullying felt too deep-rooted, like something she couldn't escape. It was easier to lie, to say everything was okay, and hope that things might magically improve on their own. But they didn't. As the isolation deepened, Emily began to feel like an outsider in her own life. Her classmates seemed to have formed unbreakable bonds, laughing and chatting in groups while she was left standing on the outside, unable to join in. Every time she walked through the school gates, a sense of dread filled her chest. It wasn't just that the kids made fun of her. It was the feeling of being invisible yet constantly watched, like a spectacle for others' amusement. She longed for a friend, someone to understand her pain. But each time she reached out, she was met with rejection, as if her very presence was something to be ridiculed. The loneliness became unbearable, and Emily found herself retreating even further into herself. She spent more time alone in her room, drawing aimlessly or staring out of the window, wishing for things to be different. But as each day passed, the weight of the bullying grew heavier. She began to question her worth. Were the cruel words true? Was she really just a burden, a joke, a worthless person? The uncertainty clouded her thoughts, making it even harder to see a way out. The world outside felt cold and indifferent, and Emily struggled to hold on to the small bits of hope she had left. Yet with every passing day, that hope was slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of despair. That evening, as the sounds of the movie played softly from the living room, Emily sat on her bed, her legs pulled up to her chest. Ben had come in, with his usual wide-eyed enthusiasm, offering her the chance to join him for a movie marathon. Despite herself, Emily had agreed. She had always enjoyed the comfort of her brother's company, even though lately she'd been too consumed by her pain to truly appreciate it. As she sat there in the silence of her room, the warmth of his offer echoed in her mind. It wasn't much, but it felt like a tiny spark of light in the otherwise overwhelming darkness she had been feeling. Emily sat motionless for a few moments, staring at the door, the noise from the TV seeping into the corners of her thoughts. A part of her wanted to stay locked away, to retreat further into the shadows of her own mind, where no one could see her suffering. But another part, a part that had almost been silenced by the constant bullying, began to stir. Maybe it was Ben's innocent question, or maybe it was the realization that she didn't have to face this alone. The truth was, Emily had never truly confided in anyone. She had kept everything bottled up inside, hoping that somehow things would get better on their own. But that hope had been dwindling, and now, with Ben's simple invitation, she wondered if there was a way out of this dark place. Her heart began to race as the weight of the decision hit her. Should she speak up? Should she tell her parents? The thought terrified her. For so long she had hidden the truth, burying it under layers of silence. She didn't want to disappoint her parents or make them worry. She didn't want them to think that they had failed her. But the crushing weight of the bullying had become too much to carry alone. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone in. Slowly, Emily stood up and made her way to the living room. Ben was sprawled on the couch, his eyes glued to the screen. He didn't look up at first, completely absorbed in the movie, but when he heard her footsteps, he paused the film and turned to her with a grin. "You coming to watch, Em?" Emily hesitated, her hands nervously twisting the hem of her sleeve. For a moment, she thought about retreating, returning to the safety of her room. But the weight in her chest urged her forward, reminding her that she couldn't continue hiding. "Actually," she said, her voice shaky, I need to talk to Mom and Dad." Ben's face softened in surprise, though he didn't push her. He simply nodded, understanding that his sister was going through something much deeper than he could comprehend. "Okay, Em. I'll be here when you're ready." As Emily walked into the kitchen, she found her mom and dad sitting at the table, discussing the day's events. Her mother was sipping tea, and her father was reading through some paperwork. They looked up when Emily entered, and for a moment, the room fell silent. Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure where to begin, how to explain the overwhelming pain that had been festering inside her for so long, but she had to start somewhere. Taking a deep breath, she said, I don't know how to say this, but things aren't okay at school. I've been getting bullied." Her parents exchanged worried glances, their faces etched with concern. Emily's mother reached for her hand, her eyes filled with both sadness and confusion. "Emily, why didn't you tell us sooner?" she asked gently. "We would have done something to help." Emily struggled to find the words. "I didn't want to worry you," she whispered. "I thought it would stop, but it didn't. It's been getting worse." The room seemed to close in on her as her parents absorbed her words. Emily felt vulnerable, exposed in a way she had never allowed herself to be. But at the same time, a small sense of relief washed over her. She wasn't keeping the burden to herself anymore. Her parents listened, their concern growing with every word she spoke. As she recounted the taunts, the names, the photos shared online, she could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. But this time, she didn't try to hold them back. She let them fall, one by one, as her parents held her close. Her father squeezed her hand gently. "Emily, we're so sorry you've been going through this alone," he said softly. "We'll make sure this stops. We're going to help you. We're going to make it right." The weight in Emily's chest didn't vanish immediately, but for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, and she knew there was still a long road ahead, but she also knew that she didn't have to walk it alone anymore. With her parents by her side, she could finally face the pain that had been haunting her for so long. It wouldn't be quick or simple, but the first step was finally taken. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Emily's world began to shift in small, subtle ways. The first step her parents took was contacting the school, and soon after, meetings were arranged with the administration. The principal, teachers, and counselors began to take action, initiating an investigation into the bullying that had been happening under their noses for so long. At first, Emily felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by the deep-rooted fear that had built up inside her. She still had to face the very people who had tormented her, and that thought terrified her. The bullies, though they were disciplined, still lurked in the hallways. Their cold stares, the whispered insults, they didn't disappear overnight. Emily couldn't erase the memories of the laughter or the harsh words. She still saw the images of the mocking posts online, still heard the echoes of the insults in her head. Despite the school's attempts to make things right, the emotional damage wasn't something that could be fixed so easily. The pain wasn't something that could be erased with a few meetings or reprimands. But as time went on, Emily began to notice a change in herself. She started attending therapy sessions with a counselor at school, someone who listened and helped her sort through the jumbled mess of emotions she had been bottling up for so long. It wasn't a quick fix, and there were still days when the weight of everything felt unbearable, but she learned how to process her pain in a healthier way. The more she talked about what had happened, the more she understood that the bullying wasn't her fault. She wasn't the one who was weak. It was the bullies who had been wrong. Slowly, Emily began to rebuild her sense of self-worth. She reconnected with her passion for drawing, once again pouring her heart into her art. But this time, her drawings were different. They weren't just sketches of animals or landscapes. Her work became an outlet for her emotions, a way for her to express the hurt and the healing. Her art, once an escape from her pain, began to reflect her journey toward recovery. It became a symbol of her strength, of the resilience she hadn't even known she possessed. At school, the atmosphere began to change as well. Other students, many of whom had silently witnessed the bullying but hadn't spoken up, began to open up about their own experiences. Emily's bravery in telling her story gave others the courage to share theirs. It was clear that she wasn't the only one who had been suffering in silence. The school took steps to create a more inclusive, supportive environment, and the conversations around bullying became more open. Emily realized that by speaking out, she had started a ripple effect, a chain of events that reached far beyond her own experience. However, the hardest part of all was learning to forgive. It wasn't easy, and some days it felt impossible. The scars, both visible and invisible, didn't fade overnight. The memories of what had happened still haunted her, and there were times when the hurt resurfaced. But Emily slowly came to understand that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the actions of others. It was about freeing herself from the hold that anger and resentment had on her. She didn't need the bullies to apologize for her to heal. She had to find peace within herself, and that was a journey in its own right. As the months passed, Emily found herself stronger than she had ever been before. She didn't let the bullies define her anymore. She had come to realize that their words held no power over her unless she gave it to them. With the support of her family, friends, and the people at school who truly cared, Emily learned how to embrace who she was and stand tall, despite the pain she had endured. Her story, once one of isolation and despair, had transformed into a powerful tale of resilience and hope. Emily didn't just survive the bullying, she had become a voice for others who had suffered in silence. Her bravery inspired countless others to speak up, to stand up for themselves, and to seek help. And in the end, Emily learned that even in the darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of light, a chance to heal, to grow, and to emerge stronger than before.